Okay, we're starting again, continuing with lesson 5. We're on clip 2. In this lesson, in general, we've begun to explore the notion of Judaism and Jewish education as a text-centered endeavor and community. And our first thinker who's going to help us explore this notion is Moshe Halbertal. He's a professor of Jewish philosophy at Hebrew University and at NYU, a very, very important thinker and scholar. I'll just mention a number of his works: Concealment and Revelation, Esotericism in Jewish Thought and Its Philosophic Implications. He's also a scholar, particularly of medieval Jewish thought. He's written a book on Maimonides and another couple of books in Hebrew on various aspects of medieval Jewish thought, but he's also a thinker. In other words, he's not just exploring Jewish past and previous Jewish thinkers. His dialogue with these Jewish thinkers is part of his understanding of the direction Judaism should be taking to confront modern and postmodern challenges. And central to his philosophy, to his Jewish vision, is the notion of Judaism as a text-centered community. And I want to look at one quote from the reading, it's from the beginning. It's a very, very telling quotation. Rather than searching for the essence of Judaism in shared beliefs and practices that remain constant, though they have taken superficially diverse forms, I've chosen to focus on the shared commitment to certain texts and their role on shaping aspects of Jewish life and endowing the tradition with coherence. Now, what is he saying here? He's saying that Judaism is all about studying texts as a community. That the Jewish people, the glue that brings Jews together, is their shared commitment to studying various texts. Now it's important to distinguish between a similar view but a different view. In other words, he's not saying that Jews have to come up with the same interpretation of these texts, because then what would really be uniting the Jewish people is shared beliefs. But he rejects that. In other words, he's arguing that Jews, and he makes this argument throughout the book, that Jews are committed to studying particular texts, but aren't committed to a particular interpretation of the text. In fact, the tradition encourages debate and disagreement, machloket. And that's central to rabbinic theology, and Halbertal emphasizes this. And therefore, the foundation of Judaism is Talmud Torah, is studying texts collectively without a particular commitment to a single understanding. And Halbertal tries to identify particular features that are central to Jewish education and Judaism throughout the ages, and that shows us how foundational is this notion of studying texts as the essence of Judaism. And let's look at the number of features that Halbertal identifies in Judaism throughout the ages. Firstly, Judaism is all about, the leaders Judaism chooses are those who have a certain textual expertise. In other words, the ideal leader is a sage, is a Talmud Chacham, someone who really has proficiency, has innovation, who has who is above other people in terms of studying these texts. And what's interesting here also, and Halbertal doesn't emphasize this, at least in the reading, but it's very important for our next video. This isn't just religious leaders. Because when Judaism becomes secularized in the post-emancipation era, also secular leaders are chosen to a certain degree based on their textual proficiency. And Ahad Ha'am is a classic example. The next thinker we're going to look at, someone who isn't a religious leader, in fact, is the architect of a secular identity of Judaism. He's a leader because he brings a certain interpretation of the tradition. He's a master of the tradition, and he interprets it in an innovative way. So that's the first important point. Secondly, in Judaism, and we'll qualify this shortly, Talmud Torah becomes the supreme religious act and experience. And Judaism is very, very different than other religions, than Christianity and Islam in this respect. Talmud Torah becomes a democratic ideal that all people, here obviously there's a certain gender element. In pre-modern Judaism, it's mainly males, but with certain exceptions. But in modern Judaism, it becomes a much more fully democratic ideal. Judaism is all about studying text. It becomes a cardinal mitzvah, religious act, and it's also a way of connecting with the divine. By studying the text, you converse with God, in essence. This leads us to the third feature that Halbertal emphasizes, the canon, and here I'm quoting from the reading, as the focus of endless interpretations and debate. I already mentioned this, that the Jewish canon is an open canon. In other words, it's never closed. Even though the Bible and then later on the Talmud becomes the central texts that are interpreted, additional layers are always being added to the Jewish canon. And we talked about this. A religious leader is someone who not only knows the canon, is not only a master of the canon, but he or she is someone who adds to the canon, who reaches out to the canon, understands the canon, but interprets it in a way that the canon becomes expanded. The Torah is infinite. It has infinite layers, and it's dependent on particularly scholars, but really every person, to add their particular interpretation, their particular understanding, and therefore bringing to revelation an additional layer of the text. Now, another element here is the importance of Talmudic Judaism, and in a certain sense for Halbertal, Talmudic Judaism has supremacy over biblical Judaism. In other words, Judaism today is much more influenced and shaped by the basic assumptions of Talmudic Judaism rather than biblical Judaism. According to Halbertal, after the Churban, after the destruction of the temple, Judaism faces a particular challenge. The foundations of biblical Judaism become problematic. A cultic Judaism surrounding the temple, and Talmudic Judaism introduces very new a new structure based on prayer, and particularly based on Talmud Torah, a much more portable Judaism that's grounded in the synagogue and particularly in the Beit Midrash. And then we get to the last notion for Halbertal, one of the few uniting concepts upon which Jews throughout history and currently accept. In other words, why is Talmud Torah so important for Halbertal? Because the previous notion, the previous common language that united Jews, which is a commitment to practice and beliefs, is no longer current within the Jewish people. There are deep divisions regarding beliefs and practices, and the result, we have to find a new common language, and that's based on studying texts together. Again, not necessarily agreeing about how to interpret these texts, but being committed to the same texts, and also committed to studying them together. Now, I hope after we've gone through this list of the principles of Habertal's approach, this will echo something that we've done previously, a thinker that we've looked at previously, and that's David Hartman. Hartman, who was a teacher of Moshe Halbertal. Halbertal studied many years in the Beit Midrash of Hartman and then headed the Beit Midrash for many years. I was privileged to study with Halbertal in the Hartman Beit Midrash. And much of his argument comes from what we've seen in the very important essay of Hartman, In Search of a Guiding Vision for Jewish Education. And I'll just go back to one sentence here from that essay. Judaism is not a religion in the ordinary sense, a faith system, a body of beliefs and practices, but also, and today most important, an ongoing discussion of a committed interpretive community. For Hartman, Judaism is all about a discussion that began in the Talmudic period, that rabbis begin to study the Talmud together. They add a new layer to the tradition, and then Jews afterwards discuss the Bible and the Talmud. They add new layers, and this discussion and debate continues throughout Jewish history, and that's what Judaism is all about. And you could read Habertal's book as an explication, a reading of Judaism that kind of grounds Hartman's argument. And therefore, this is, just to end, what we have here is a very important rationale for why Jewish education should be all about studying texts. It's a religious act. Jews, to try to connect to God, study texts together, and that's what Judaism is all about. Thank you.